I call him Boss Man Chris. He's never been my boss. Everyone calls him Boss Man Chris. His name is Chris Morrell. He's been in the Laravel ecosystem for quite some time. He is the co-founder of a company called Internachi. They've got about 35 employees, but 30,000 members. And so it's a trade organization for home inspectors. So Bossman Chris is the boss of that company, but that does not stop him from being deeply technical. He's got a lot of Laravel packages, PRs to the framework, and he is here to talk about one of my favorite things, advanced Eloquent relations. Please give it up for Bossman Chris.
Yeah. Thanks, sir.
Do it.
Hello. All right. Here we go. All right, so this is usually where I would do a quick introduction, but I got a text from my wife last night with something to replace that with, so without further ado, here is what my 10-year-old thinks everyone at Laracon needs to know about me. Thank you, Gene. So I am Chris. I am the type of person who really hates to not understand how things work. So I spend a lot of my free time, I suppose, just digging into the code that I work with. I do a lot of source diving, and I was thinking about it, and honestly, I think that I have probably looked at every line of Laravel code that I've ever called in our project, which means that I have looked at a lot of Eloquent. So today I'm going to be talking about what happens when we call a line of code like this. I'm going to be talking about relations. Relations are really just a query builder and some PHP code. We don't necessarily think about it that way all the time, but under the hood, that's all they really are. And in fact, the query builder part is a little bit optional. So when you really get to it, relations and Eloquent are just code. Now, obviously, the database side of things matters. And folks much smarter than me, like Jonathan Rennick and Aaron Francis, and many others have talked about all the interesting ways that we can use recursive CTEs or subqueries or all sorts of amazing, incredible database features to do interesting things with Eloquent. So I'm not going to talk about that today. Today, I'm going to focus on the PHP side of the ORM. So let's actually look at some PHP code. We're going to be starting with lazy loading. Lazy loading is when you do something like this, right? We're going to load a post directly from the database, and without asking for it ahead of time, we're going to try to load the comments relation off that model. When we do that under the hood, we're going to be calling this get attribute method. And if that attribute is a relation, it's going to call get relation value, which ultimately gets us to get relationship from method. It's going to instantiate our relation, and in this case, this is just our model. So in our example, that's going to be something like posts, and method is just the relation we're trying to load. So in that case, it's comments. So if you have a very straightforward looking post model that has many comments, that's what we're talking about here. It's going to load the data via that relation. It's going to set it onto the model so that if we access it again, we don't have to query the database again, and then it's going to return it. Lazy loading is really pretty straightforward under the hood. That's pretty much all there is to it. When we get to eager loading, things get a little bit more complicated. So we're going to use the same example as before. Posts have many comments, but before we actually get into the code, I want to talk about it a little bit more conceptually. I like to think about eager loading. We're talking about a case like this, right? Where we're loading a couple of posts, we're loading the comments along with them, and we're getting it all at the same time. I like to think about it in 3 different phases. We start by adding constraints. So imagine we've loaded a couple of posts. We need to do something to figure out what comments do we need to load for those posts. In the case of it has many, that might look something like this. We're going to select all the comments from the database where the post ID is one of the posts that we've loaded. Once we set up our constraints, we get the results. Typically, this is going to be calling the database. So we'll load up all of the comments from the database that match our query. And finally, we're going to go to the match phase. This is when our relation, and depending on the type of relation we have, this has to behave differently. But this is when our relation takes all of the parent models, the posts in this case, and the loaded relations, and figures out how to match them back to each other. Depending on whether this is a has many, like this example, or has many through, or something else, like each time the match operation is going to look different, but that's the basic principle. So now that we have the sort of theory down, looking at the code, I hope, is going to be pretty straightforward. When we call get on our query builder, if we've asked to eager load relations, it's going to loop through all of those relations that we asked to load, and one by one, it's going to call this eager load relation method. And hopefully this looks pretty straightforward, right? We're going to add our constraints, we're going to get the results, we're going to match those results back and return what we got, right? So if we kind of step back and look at what the interface of relation looks like, it looks something like this. We've got a couple of methods here for lazy mode. We've got a few methods for eager mode. For the purposes of this talk, I'm going to focus on eager mode because I think that if you understand the eager context, then you can figure out the lazy context. So we can kind of ignore most of this interface and really just focus in on adding constraints. We're going to get an array of the parent models that we need to load relationships for, and then match. Now we've got all the models that were our parents, all the related models that are the results of our query, and the name of the relation, and we have to figure out what we're going to do with all of that so that our models are populated with the stuff that we asked for. So now that we got some of the theory out of the way, let's look at some real code. Real quick, a couple notes. I'm going to be showing all of this through a bunch of very unconventional relations. A lot of this is not something that you really are going to do in your app, but I hope to use that as a way to sort of demonstrate some of the principles. And don't worry about taking notes. All the code's going to be available for download. I'll put a link on my website, cmorrell.com. And also this is a little bit of just like a freight train of code coming at you. So just like, let it wash over you. Don't worry if you're not following every single line, because it's more the general principles that we're getting at, not the specific details. So without further ado, I'm going to switch to... Okay. So, all right, let's start with, oh gosh. Let's start with the first example. So, I'm not saying that any of you would ever do this. I certainly never do this. This is not a real world example that I'm about to give. Imagine that at some point someone thought, hey, instead of using pivot tables, let's just store a comma-separated list of IDs in the database. And again, this is all hypothetical. This isn't a real world scenario. Imagine that data has been around for a decade and you have a bunch of reasons why it can't change, right? Wouldn't it be great if we could still do all of the things that we love to do in Eloquent with this weird data set? That's kind of what I'm talking about here. So let's just hop over. We've got all of the Laracon events with the list of their speakers, but the speakers are just this comma-separated list. So if we hop over into the event, let's create a new relation. We're going to start the same way you usually would. We're going to return public function. Oh my gosh, there we go. Speakers, right? But instead of doing something like we have down here, this belongs to, this has many, all those methods are doing is instantiating a new relation class for you. We can just return our own custom relation class. So right here, we can return a new has speakers relation. This needs to know what it's related to. So in this case, we're going to pass in the event class as the thing that the speakers are related to. But we can do whatever we want in here. So if we jump into has speakers, you can see we have to go ahead and implement those two methods. The first one is add eager constraint. So again, we've got our list of events as an array of models, and we need to figure out how to set up our query builder so that it can load all the speakers that we're going to need to match those models. So that might look something like this. We can collect all of our models. We can map over them and just use the PHP explode function to split those comma-separated lists into arrays. We'll flat map it so that it gets into one single array of IDs, and then we'll call unique so that we just have a single copy of each ID in the list. And then we could just do a where in on that data. When we get to match, now we've got that same list of models, that's our events, and now we have a big list of speakers that we need to match back to those events. But again, all of the events just have a comma-separated list, so we have to do something a little differently. So that can look oops, that's the wrong one. Match. That can look something like this. We'll key all of the results by ID so they're easy to look up. And then we're just going to loop over every event. We're going to new up a empty collection to populate, because this is sort of a quasi-has-many. And then we can just kind of do the same work again. We're just going to explode that list of speaker IDs. We're going to say, if our results have that ID, then we're going to push it into our collection. We'll clone it so that each individual collection has a separate copy of the model. And then we're just going to push it onto the models relation so that if we go back over and refresh, now we can just load those speaker models as though it was a regular Eloquent relation without having to think about it. Right? So we have to do a little bit of work to set up the relation, but then from then on out, we get to use Eloquent just like the way we would normally. So we talked about a scenario where the foreign keys are not exactly the way that we expect. What if we don't have any foreign keys? Here I have a map of all the Laracon US events. And I'm the type of person who likes to have a suite every day. So wouldn't it be cool if I could load all of the ice cream shops that are nearby every venue to plan my trip accordingly? The events have coordinates. They have a latitude and longitude in the database. And my ice cream shops have a latitude and longitude in the database. So theoretically, I can do it, but I want to have all the niceties of Eloquent. So what might that look like? We go over here and we just add a new ice cream shop relation. And I have put together a little example. This is a has-near relation. What we're going to do is we're going to set up a query where we use a MySQL database feature that calculates the distance on a sphere between 2 points. So we'll loop over all of the parent models, that would be the events, and we're going to create a statement that gives us the distance between the location on the ice cream shop, and the point that represents our event. We're going to then add an or where statement to our query builder saying, or where the distance is less than the threshold that we've set. So in this case, I set it to 500 meters. And that is going to get us essentially a big database query that says, give me all the ice cream shops that are within 500 meters of this point, or 500 meters of this point, or 500 meters of this point, right? So now when we get to the match, we're sort of confronted with a new problem. We're typically matching on foreign keys, but we don't have any foreign keys to work with here. So what we can do is, because it's just PHP code, we can kind of do the same thing in the beginning. We're going to go through all those parent models, we'll new up an empty collection. But instead of matching on a foreign key, we're actually just going to compare the distance. I wrote a little version of the haversine greater distance calculation, which is something that I'm sure a bunch of people have encountered in the past. Many maybe haven't, but it's just a way to take 2 points and find the distance. And we're just going to say, hey, if the parent, in this case, the event, and the related, in this case, the ice cream shop, if the distance is less than our threshold, then we're going to push a copy of it into the collection. And so what happens is now we can eager load, and if we dig in here, we can see that we can load in all the ice cream shops in one single has many style eager loaded query. It's pretty neat. So we talked about a scenario where our foreign keys are a little weird. We talked about a scenario where we don't have foreign keys. There's nothing really requiring us to actually talk to a database. So imagine that you have sort of a basic app that's like, we've got organizations have teams have users, and I don't have any data yet. We could go in here and go into the organization model, and where we have a regular has many, I'm just going to replace that with fake teams. I threw together a little custom relation that uses the faker implementation that we use in our factory methods, but instead of even having to see the database, we can just generate them on the fly. We'll go into team. We could do the same thing here. We can do has some fake users, and now when we refresh, every time we refresh, you'll see it's just going to give us different numbers because this data is just totally random on the fly as we go. Probably never going to do this, but it proves the point. And to prove the point even further, we don't even need to return models in our relationship method, right? So I've got, again, this list of speakers. We could create a relation between speakers and the letters in the alphabet based on their name. Why not? Let's do it. If we go into speaker, we'll go has letters. Who hasn't wanted to have a has letters relationship, In here, you'll see when we're adding eager constraints, we're not even doing anything because we're never going to touch the database. We're just going to literally return a range from A to Z for everything. And then when we match, we're just going to check, okay, is the attribute that I passed in, which is the name, does it contain the letter? If so, push it into the collection. And if we look at what that looks like, there we go. I don't know why you'd want it, but I love that it exists. Okay. Thank you. So the last example I think is kind of interesting. We'll go back to our map, but this kind of comes a little bit closer to a real world use case. It's not going to be a real world example, but sometimes I find that you have real data coming back from the database that you need to do something interesting with before you use it. And there's nothing stopping you from actually doing that inside of a custom relation if it makes sense. So here we've got, again, all of the most recent Laracon US events. But if we go over to organization and change this has many to we'll return a new has predicted events, this is another little fun relation I threw together. So this is extending has many. So we're going to do everything that has many already does. But when we get the results, before we return them, we're going to pass them into the mystical Alzara, which actually is just a little wrapper around Prism. I've put together a little prompt. So we're going to predict the next X number of events for the organization we're working with. We're going to pass in all of the past events so that it can use that for the prompt. And then we just ask it to return JSON. Now that I watched the Prism talk, I know that I could use the structured data, which would be very cool. And I'm just going to hop in here. I think we should make sure to include Philly. And then this is just going to pass it to Prism. We're going to ask Claude to predict some events. And when we go back over to our has predicted events, here we go. Once we get those predictions back, we can just loop over them and push them into the collection that we already have. So I'm just going to create some new event models with a title and location that are LLM generated. I'm going to take those speakers and create some speaker models and attach them to the events, push that all into the result set and return it. So if we refresh, we'll see We get a nice list of all the existing Laracons and then a bunch of predictions. We got Sacramento, we've got Phoenix. Look at that, it recommended Philadelphia. That's a really good idea. If we refresh again, we're gonna get some different ones. You know, each time it's just passing it to an LLM. To be fair, I did do this earlier and then cache the data. That's why it's so fast. But you can see we can do whatever we want. So if there is one takeaway from today, I hope it is Eloquent relations are just PHP code. Like everything else in the framework, like everything else in all the packages that you install, under the hood is just code. We know how to do all sorts of interesting things with code. That doesn't mean that you should. 90, 95, 99% of the time, you should just stick to conventions. It's going to be easier for your team. It's going to be easier to maintain. It's going to be better for you all around. But there will come a time when the data that you're working with is just shaped a little differently, or the business needs are just a little bit outside of the norm. And I hope that now you have one more tool in your tool belt to reach for when that happens. Thanks.
Ready? All right. Well done, sir. That was amazing. Here is your Artisan jacket. So I think the thing I like most about that is you made that feel very approachable, because Eloquent is kind of like this terrifying thing.
It doesn't have to be. It's not.
But which of those, if any, probably has letters? Which one are you using in production? Are you using any of the unconventional relations in production?
So we have a version of the has near that we use.
Okay.
And we have a couple of relations that essentially need to do multiple queries inside of them and then blend those results together for various reasons.
Okay.
So the last one is kind of inspired by that, but it has a much more practical use case.
And have you packaged up any Eloquent relation code and published that?
I haven't.
Okay.
I've thought about it because I think that you really can get away with almost just implementing those two methods, maybe three methods. And I've thought about like writing a custom relation that essentially wraps everything so that then you just write those three methods and the rest of it works. But I haven't got to it.
Okay, my vote is for has near. I think that was my favorite. Has letters was the funniest, but has near is the best. So y'all give it up for Chris.
Thank you. Good job, man.